All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is for educational purposes, and on this channel, today is Bible Decode number 268. We investigate the ins and outs of all kinds of theories and discoveries, magnum opuses and tour de forces from people that you probably never heard of before. Obscure things that have probably been suppressed because they might clue you in to something that would liberate you or give you inside track on better health or wealth or awakening. And we've been exploring the ins and outs of the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is, that the New Testament was actually written by the Roman Caesars of the Flavian dynasty for the purposes of psychological warfare. The Romans wrote the New Testament in order to attempt to mellow out the Jews, or to tame or domesticate the Jews. The Jews had been a big thorn in the side of the Romans ever since they rolled into Judea in 63 BC under Pompey, and 125 years later, 130 years later, under Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Titus and Domitian. They're known as the Flavian dynasty of Caesars from 69 until 96 AD. They wrote this gospel story with the intention of giving the Jews a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' heavy pack and turning the other cheek to oppression. Now, the Messiah that the Jews were waiting for was a military commander who was going to help the Jews rise up and overthrow the Romans. And so the Romans tried to preempt that by writing about this character named Jesus. And they left behind plenty of evidence about what they did and how they did it. Now you can kind of see their motive, especially for Vespasian and Titus, the two first Flavian emperors who were military generals in the war against the Jews from 66 to 73 AD. Both of them were wounded in the war. Both of them had been witness to many years of Jewish uprisings and revolts and insurrections and assassinations and riots and flat-out wars against the Romans. The Jews were generally a separatist and xenophobic people who believed they were the chosen ones of their God, and that their God was somewhat obsessive compulsive about putting all kinds of rituals and strictures on them that they had to keep under pain of death. And the Romans, this was not the way that the Romans wanted to manage their empire. They wanted everybody to kind of obey the Romans. They were okay with you practicing your own religion as long as you gave it up to Caesar a little bit as well. But when Emperor Caligula attempted to put a bust of his statue in the Jewish temple, that literally almost caused a war, because the Jews believed in strictures against graven images, and that's why the money changers were at the outer court of the temple, so that they could exchange the dirty Roman money with the graven images all over it with the kosher Jewish money, so that it could be used to buy small animals for the offering for the sacrifice. And that is what Jesus, as portrayed in the New Testament, fought against. Everything that Jesus fought against in the New Testament is Jewish. And at the same time, he was completely deferential to the Romans. And then as you move along in the New Testament, you can discover that Paul was even more pro-Roman and anti-Jew than Jesus was. And so this leaves you shaking your head and raising a red flag. What's going on here? And one of the authors who does do that is Robert Eisenman. We're going over one of his books called, which is a compendium of a couple of his shorter books. We're going over one of his books that's called Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran. And Qumran is the location where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And so Eisenman, this is before really Joseph Atwill's book, Caesar's Messiah, which really popularized the Roman origins hypothesis, even though it's still largely suppressed. And Michael Menescott's new book that's called Christianity's Origin as a Flavian Secrecy Cult, which provides, I think, airtight proof that the Romans wrote the New Testament, because they put everything in code. And the thing that you need to understand and break down the code is a different book, also written by the Romans, this time explicitly by the Romans, which is called Jewish War, the history of the war between the Romans and the Jews, 66 to 73 AD, in 7 volumes, under the name of Flavius Josephus, the author. And Flavius Josephus, as his name implies, was a member of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars by adoption. According to his own autobiography, he was a Jewish military commander until he surrendered to Emperor Vespasian. And in doing so, he had an epiphany that God now favors the Romans and not the Jews, and he defected to the Romans. And he also predicted that that Vespasian would one day become the new emperor. And when that happened, Vespasian pardoned Josephus, brought him to Rome, set him up in a townhouse at Caesar's palace where he lived the rest of his life, and made him one of the court historians and adopted him as a member of his family. Now, that's hard to believe. It's quite possible that Josephus never existed and that this was just the pen name of some other Roman writing, but regardless, the main point is that the book of Josephus, Jewish War, was issued under the auspices and with the great endorsement of the Roman Caesars, the Flavians. And if you read Josephus, you will discover, looking with the right lens, you will discover that whoever wrote Josephus also wrote the New Testament, because there are just too many parallels between the two. Michael Menescott's found over 250 parallels just in the book of Luke. And he graphed them on a chart. put the book of Luke on the vertical axis, War of the Jews on the horizontal axis, and discovered that when he plotted a point for every location of a parallel, the 250 plus points that he plotted formed 5 almost perfect letters in Latin, APTVS, Titus Vespasianus for the TVS, and the AP is subject to some speculation, but the main point, again, is that not only did the Romans write the book of Luke, but they signed their names to it, or they put their initials on it, so that one day you would discover this. 2,000 years later, I think they didn't think it was going to take that long. Another aspect of the motive for, especially for Vespasian, is that when he was named emperor in 69 AD, this was the culmination of the Roman Civil War. In the 12 months prior to Vespasian being given the call to be the new emperor, Emperor Nero was assassinated. Emperor Galba was assassinated. Emperor Otho was assassinated. And Emperor Vitellius was assassinated. So 4 Caesars were assassinated in a 12-month period before Vespasian got the call. So naturally, he's going to be a little bit insecure about his position there, and he's going to do things to shore up his position. And one of those things was writing the New Testament in order to mellow out the Jews who were, bent on assassination. And this was also going to mellow out other people who believed in those scriptures as well, including the Roman slaves and Roman soldiers. Now, Joseph Atwill, in his book, he also has discovered that the ministry of Jesus in Judea is nothing but a parody of the military campaign of Titus in Judea. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus also goes, in the same order. And they both experience parallel events at each location that are separated by 40 years exactly. And we're talking about over 40 separate events, all in the same order. So also the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are literally fulfilled in the pages of War of the Jews, especially his major prediction that the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem would be a sign of his second coming. And in 70 AD, according to War of the Jews, Jerusalem was destroyed by Emperor Titus, making Titus the second coming of Jesus, and making all of our 21st century apocalyptic visions about the book of Revelations null and void. The apocalypse occurred in 70 AD with the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, our second coming of Jesus. And this was well known by theologians all throughout the years, a majority view by theologians up until the 20th century. Now, when we're reading this book from Eisenman, he does not know about the Roman origins hypothesis. He is kind of adjacent to it. He smells a rat. He knows something's wrong with the New Testament, especially Paul's behavior, to a lesser extent Jesus' behavior, and he has access to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which Eisenman was instrumental in getting released to the public, because these Dominican priests had taken custody of the Dead Sea Scrolls after they were discovered in the 40s and 50s, and really they sat on them and didn't publish them, didn't do anything with them, didn't translate them publicly, because there was something in them that was embarrassing for these Catholic priests, and they were content on sitting on them for eternity, until Eisenman and a few other scholars made us think about it in the late 80s, early 90s. So it was still 30, 40 years after the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered that they finally got into the hands of some scholars. And by that time, they were not even that keen on them, because, you know, the scholars that were keen on the Dead Sea Scrolls had already died off. So Eisenman has a thorough grasp of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, appear to talk about some of the same events that were discussed in the New Testament. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is the teacher of righteousness, and then there is the wicked priest, and then there is the liar. And Eisenman contends that the teacher of righteousness was actually James, the brother of Jesus. Other scholars contend that the teacher of righteousness was John the Baptist, and then obviously some think that it was Jesus. So we're here in the introduction to this work, but we just started this book yesterday. So we're a few pages in, and we're going to start right here, starting with the description of the Anshe Hesed Zadikim, in Hebrew Ecclesiasticus, which is an apocryphal book, and Josephus's parallel note about Simeon the Zadok in the Antiquities. Now, the Antiquities is Josephus's second major work. War of the Jews was in 7 volumes. Antiquities of the Jews came out about 20 years later, in about 93 AD. And that's in 20 volumes, Antiquities of the Jews. Now, what Eisenman doesn't know is that if he would have known about the Roman origins hypothesis, which I believe he does now, if he's still alive, but he did, 10 years ago. But this book is much older than that. But Josephus is obviously not to be trusted. Josephus is every bit as much propaganda as the New Testament is. And this is a major problem for first century scholarship. Josephus is the rock that scholars lean upon for the first century history, because he's really the only one there. And when you recognize that his stuff is propaganda and may or may not be true, and some of it may be true, or all of it may be true, or none of it may be true, that creates a huge problem and a huge void in the first century, because the New Testament and Josephus are pretty much our main sources for understanding the first century. Now, into that void walks the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, were buried in a bunch of caves for 1900 years before they were discovered. But now they are in the public grasp. Okay, so Josephus's parallel about Simeon the Zadok in the Antiquities. This dichotomy is the common thread running through all Josephus's descriptions of Essenes. Now, just keep in mind, again, Josephus is one of only three people who've ever talked about the Essenes from this time period. That also includes Philo and I think Pliny the Elder. And all of them are part of the Roman royal, network. So none of them can be trusted. And I personally don't believe that the Essenes ever existed. And I think Eisenman's argument here is really that the Essenes and the Zadokites and the Zealots and the Hasidic Jews and the Nazarenes. They're all talking about the same people, and the Qumran crowd, the monks that lived near these caves where they deposited these Dead Sea Scrolls upon their destruction due to the Romans in the late 60s A.D. They're all the same people, is basically what he's saying. So the fact that the Essenes maybe didn't exist, they may have existed in principle, but you may have called them the Zealots or the Nazarenes. Josephus' description of John the Baptist's wilderness activities and all early church accounts of James, who was the leader of the Nazarites, the brother of Jesus, along with Peter, and comprises the essential basis of what we shall describe as the Zadokite Hasidian movement, where James and the Essenes were concerned, and probably Jesus as well. The righteousness commandment of James 2:8 on the supreme law of Scripture underwent the additional fundamental metamorphosis into a demand for economic equality, which is at the root of, quote, the poor, terminologies which is prevalent in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the hostility toward the rich, so closely connected with all these Essene-like or Jewish Christian personalities. Another important theme in this period is the hidden ideology we have alluded to above. This is linked in our literature to hiding in caves, and taken all the way back via Zohar tradition to the first Zadok, Noah's paradigmatic experience of being hidden by God in the ark to escape the destruction that was being unleashed. It finds additional expression in a strong redivivus tradition adhering to these Noachic priests, Zadoks, which in turn is closely associated with another element in the Noachic tradition, rainmaking. An additional echo of all of these motifs is to be found in the Talmud, in the redivivus and hidden traditions circulating about Honi, the circle drawing Zadok, not to mention in Josephus's magician and impostor accusations. Not only does the ARN, and I do not remember what the ARN is, not only does the ARN associate rainmaking with proper, that is Zadokite, temple service, but in the war scroll, eschatological rain imagery is definitively connected to the exegesis of the star prophecy. And as far as I know, the star prophecy is basically what Josephus gave to Vespasian. I predict that one day you will become the new emperor. And incidentally, this star prophecy is supposed to be only for Jews, but Josephus applied it to Vespasian. And if you look into the origins of rabbinic Judaism, the founder of the rabbinic school was Yohanan ben Zakkai, and he also gave the star prophecy to Vespasian right about the same time. And that led to Ben Zakkai getting a land grant for a large campus to start for a college for the study of the Jewish scriptures. Another psychological operation by the Romans against the Jews to get them diverted away from political interest and into the endless probing into the depths of their scriptures. This is also another star prophecy was given by one of the so-called members of the Essenes to Herod the Great. They gave Herod the Great the star prophecy, predicted he would become emperor, and as a result, Herod had a soft spot for the Essenes. This is expressed in terms of, quote, the Messiah coming to give, quote, judgment, and the coming of the heavenly host to rain judgment from the clouds on all the sons of men. The connection of both of these allusions with the well-known Messiah, quote, coming on the clouds of heaven imagery should be clear. This is precisely the proclamation early church tradition attributes to James, to whom the rain-making tradition also adhered, and it is repeated in the letter conserved under his name, which itself culminates in messianic rain imagery, and in the process specifically refers to one of the key rain-making forerunners in the redivivus tradition, Elijah. Two titles, Zadok and Oblias, O-B-L-I-A-S, or protection of the people, the last paralleled in the Qumran shield, or fortress imagery. These two titles were applied as if integrally to James's being, and it is specifically acknowledged that Qumran-style scriptural exegesis was carried on with regard to his person. Also, two adversaries can be readily identified with regard to his life. These, in turn, precisely parallel the two nemeses of the righteous teacher. One, an establishment high priest outside the movement called wicked, and the other, a treacherous individual within the movement who follows a more antinomian approach to the law, leading many astray, and is variously dubbed the liar, the pourer out of lying, the scoffer, or the boaster. Now, these characters maybe were Caiaphas, the high priest, the wicked priest, and the liar would be Paul. Tradition, too, actually places James with all his community in the Jericho area in the early 40s, corresponding to an impressive rise in Qumran coin distribution under Agrippa I, who was one of Herod's descendants and was the governor of Judea in the 40s, 44 to 49 AD, I believe. Now, he says this is all from tradition. I don't know exactly what that means. It should be appreciated that according to the scheme of the Damascus document, the messianic root has already been killed, and that therefore dwelling too much on the person of the Messiah, who even for gospel artificers and their modern day form critical and redactionist inheritors is a figure shrouded in mystery, will not prove very productive. Now, the Damascus document is one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was actually discovered in Egypt in the late 19th century, but then another copy was discovered amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he says a messianic root has already been killed, and that therefore dwelling too much on the person of the Messiah will not prove very productive. That's rather interesting. So this was the defect of Tycher's fantastic theorizing, which did more to discredit work on this subject than advance it. itself prefigured in the earlier and more solid work done on the Damascus document by Margoliouth. However, the Damascus document does conclude with the unmistakable evocation of a messianic return, repeated 3 times. The language it uses precisely corresponds to James's several like-minded proclamations noted above, and Paul in 1 Thessalonians 3:13. A proper grasp of the Hebrew usage, amod, A-M-O-D, which does not only mean coming, as per most translations, but also standing up, as per the original reference in Ezekiel, would clarify these matters. Finally, it should be appreciated that Qumran exegetical interpretation raises the clear presumption of a first-century providence for most Qumran sectarian materials. And so this is a big deal because the Dominicans, they were of the belief, and they trotted out a bunch of archaeologists and paleographical specialists to demonstrate that the Qumran materials were from the 2nd century BC, or at the latest, the 1st century BC. This was to try to distance the materials from Jesus, because they did not want the Dead Sea Scrolls to be associated with Jesus in any manner. But it is Eisenman's point of view that these scriptures, these Qumran material, especially the sectarian stuff. Now, there's a ton of copies of Old Testament scriptures. Every one of the Old Testament books, except for Esther, is represented among the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there's a lot of sectarian material, like this Damascus document, the War Scroll, the Temple Scroll, the Community Rule, and many peshers that are from the sect of these monks in particular. And he's saying that these are from 1st century AD. This is as true of the exegesis of Habakkuk 2:4, the pesher, and as it is for the citation of the star prophecy, which Josephus connects with the uprising against Rome, and which all available evidence attests was in the air from the 40s to the 60s AD and beyond. Upwards of 3 times in the extant